The autumn leaves crunched beneath Detective Maria Rodriguez's boots as she approached the weathered farmhouse outside Millbrook, Ohio. 26 years had passed since the Hartwell family vanished without a trace, and now a pair of child sneakers had emerged from the depths of Miller's Pond, reigniting one of the state's most haunting cold cases. The small pink shoes, barely size 3, had been preserved remarkably well in the murky water, still bearing the faded marker inscription, Emma H., in a mother's careful handwriting. Before we continue with this incredible story, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. October 14th, 1995, had started like any other Saturday in the quiet farming community of Millbrook. The Hartwell family, David, 34, his wife Jennifer, 32, and their 3 children, Michael, 12, Rebecca, 8, and little Emma, just turned 5, were celebrating Emma's birthday with a small party at their century-old farmhouse. The property, which had been in David's family for 3 generations, sat on 47 acres of rolling farmland, bordered by dense woods and the meandering Miller's Creek. Jennifer had spent the morning decorating the kitchen with pink streamers and balloons, while David grilled hamburgers on the back patio. The children's laughter echoed across the fields as neighborhood friends arrived for the celebration. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, their closest neighbor living nearly a mile away, would later tell investigators she remembered hearing the joyful sounds carrying on the crisp autumn air around 2 in the afternoon. The party had been modest, but filled with the warmth typical of the close-knit rural community. 8 children attended, along with their parents, creating a gathering of nearly 20 people. Jennifer's sister, Carol Brennan, who lived in nearby Springfield, had driven over with her 2 sons. David's brother Thomas and his wife had made the trip from Columbus. The afternoon progressed with typical childhood festivities: pin the tail on the donkey, musical chairs, and Emma's delighted squeals as she opened her presents. What made the events of that day particularly haunting was how utterly normal everything appeared. Neighbors recalled seeing cars in the Hartwell driveway throughout the afternoon. The last confirmed sighting of the family came from postal worker Raymond Clark, who delivered a package to their door at approximately 4:30 p.m. He distinctly remembered David answering the door, thanking him, and mentioning that Emma was having a wonderful birthday. The house appeared normal, with children's voices audible in the background. By Sunday evening, when Jennifer failed to show up for her weekly shift at the Millbrook Elementary School, where she worked as a librarian, concern began to mount. Jennifer was known for her reliability. In 5 years of employment, she had never missed work without calling. Principal Margaret Foster tried calling the Hartwell home repeatedly, but the phone went unanswered. When Jennifer didn't appear Monday morning either, Foster contacted the sheriff's department. Sheriff Robert Kane, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement who had known the Hartwell family personally, drove to their property that Monday afternoon. What he discovered would puzzle investigators for decades to come. The house stood unlocked, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. The kitchen still held remnants of Emma's birthday party. A few balloons deflated on the floor, dirty dishes in the sink, and a partially eaten birthday cake on the counter. Upstairs, the beds appeared slept in, with pajamas laid out as if the family had prepared for a normal Sunday night. Most peculiar were the personal items left behind. David's wallet sat on the kitchen counter, containing $247 in cash and all his credit cards. Jennifer's purse hung from a chair, her car keys inside. Both family vehicles remained in the driveway, David's pickup truck and Jennifer's sedan. In the children's rooms, favorite toys and clothing remained undisturbed. Emma's new birthday presents, including a pink bicycle she had been excited to ride, sat untouched in the living room. The initial investigation, led by Detective Frank Morrison, focused on the family's relationships and recent activities. David worked as a maintenance supervisor at the local grain elevator, a steady job that provided modest but sufficient income for the rural family. Jennifer's position at the elementary school made her well known and respected in the community. Neither parent had any known enemies, outstanding debts, or involvement in anything that might have made them targets. Interviews with party guests revealed nothing suspicious about the celebration itself. The children had played typical games. Adults had chatted about local news and upcoming harvest season, and everyone recalled the family seeming happy and relaxed. Carol Brennan, Jennifer's sister, told investigators that Jennifer had seemed particularly content that day, mentioning how grateful she was for their quiet life in Millbrook and how much Emma was enjoying her new bicycle. The case took on an urgency that gripped the entire county. Volunteer search parties combed the surrounding woods and farmland for weeks. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was called in, bringing additional resources and expertise. Bloodhounds tracked scents from the house, but lost the trail at the edge of their property near Miller's Creek. Dive teams searched the creek and nearby Miller's Pond, but found nothing. As days turned to weeks, theories began to emerge. Some suggested the family had been victims of a random crime, perhaps drifters who had targeted their isolated farmhouse. Others wondered if David had been involved in something that caught up with him, forcing the family to flee or making them targets. The most disturbing theory, whispered in coffee shops and church gatherings, was that something terrible had happened to the entire family, and their bodies had been disposed of somewhere in the vast rural landscape surrounding Millbrook. The case garnered regional media attention, with Jennifer's photograph appearing on milk cartons and missing person flyers distributed across Ohio and neighboring states. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children became involved, generating age-progressed photos of what the children might look like as they grew older. David's employer, the Grain Elevator Cooperative, offered a $10,000 reward for information, leading to the family's safe return. The community of Millbrook, with fewer than 3,000 residents, rallied together in ways that demonstrated the deep bonds of rural America. Detective Morrison pursued every lead, no matter how unlikely. Reports of Hartwell family sightings came from as far away as Florida and California, each requiring investigation and ultimately leading nowhere. He examined their finances carefully, looking for any indication of planning or unusual activity. Bank records showed typical rural family spending: groceries, school supplies, farm equipment repairs, and modest entertainment expenses. There were no large withdrawals, no unusual purchases, nothing to suggest preparation for disappearing voluntarily. The farmhouse stood empty through the harsh Ohio winter of 1995-96, becoming a source of both fascination and unease for local residents. David's extended family, uncertain about the legal implications of the disappearance, left everything exactly as investigators had found it. The property became a shrine of sorts, with community members occasionally leaving flowers by the mailbox or stopping to pray for the family's safe return. As the first anniversary approached, hope began to fade into resignation. Sheriff Kane, now approaching retirement, admitted to local reporters that the case had become the most challenging of his career. The complete absence of evidence, the lack of any logical explanation, and the seemingly impossible disappearance of 5 people without a trace defied all conventional investigative approaches. The case was officially classified as a missing persons investigation, but unofficially, many in law enforcement suspected the family had met with foul play. Years passed, and the Hartwell disappearance became part of local folklore. New families moved to Millbrook. Children who hadn't been born when the Hartwells vanished grew up hearing the story from their parents. The farmhouse eventually fell into the hands of distant relatives who sold it to a family from Columbus seeking a rural retreat. The new owners, the Andersons, renovated extensively, but reported feeling unsettled by the house's history and the occasional curiosity seekers who still drove by, hoping to glimpse the scene of the mystery. Detective Morrison retired in 2003, passing the cold case file to his successor, Detective James Sullivan. Sullivan, a methodical investigator with experience in cold cases, periodically reviewed the Hartwell file, looking for new angles or technologies that might shed light on the disappearance. DNA analysis, which had been in its infancy in 1995, offered new possibilities for evidence that might have been overlooked. However, the lack of any physical evidence from a crime scene made such advances largely irrelevant to the Hartwell case. The children who had attended Emma's birthday party grew up carrying the memory of that last normal afternoon. Several, now adults with children of their own, still lived in the Millbrook area and would occasionally discuss their recollections of the party. They remembered Emma's excitement about her new bicycle, her parents' obvious love and attention, and the absolute normalcy of what would turn out to be the family's final known hours. In 2010, the case received renewed attention when a true crime documentary crew visited Millbrook to film a segment about unsolved disappearances in rural America. The production team interviewed longtime residents, law enforcement officials, and family members, but uncovered no new evidence. The documentary, when it aired on a national cable network, generated hundreds of tips to local law enforcement, but none proved credible or useful. Miller's Pond, meanwhile, had undergone changes over the decades. Environmental concerns about agricultural runoff led to periodic cleanup efforts, and the county had installed new drainage systems that altered the water flow patterns. The pond, which had been approximately 12 feet deep in 1995, had accumulated silt and debris over the years, becoming shallower and more stagnant. Local fishing enthusiasts still visited regularly, but the area had developed a somewhat ominous reputation due to its connection to the Hartwell case. The breakthrough came on September 23, 2021, when a group of environmental science students from Ohio State University were conducting water quality tests at Miller's Pond as part of a research project on rural watershed management. Graduate student Kevin Martinez was using a probe to collect sediment samples from the pond's eastern shoreline when he noticed something unusual, partially buried in the muddy bottom, near a partially submerged log. Initially thinking he had discovered an old piece of trash, Martinez carefully extracted what appeared to be a small shoe from the mud. As he cleaned away the sediment, he realized he was holding a child's sneaker, remarkably well preserved, despite having been submerged for an unknown period. The shoe was pink with white accents, size 3, with Velcro straps instead of laces. Most significantly, written in faded black marker on the white rubber toe area, he could make out what appeared to be Emma H. Martinez immediately contacted his professor, Dr. Linda Hayes, who recognized the potential significance of the find. Dr. Hayes contacted the Holmes County Sheriff's Department, and within hours, Detective Sullivan was at the scene. The area around Miller's Pond was secured, and a full forensics team was dispatched to conduct a comprehensive search of the pond and surrounding area. The discovery of Emma's shoe sent shockwaves through the Millbrook community and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story immediately, and within days, national media had descended on the small town. For the first time in 26 years, there was physical evidence connected to the Hartwell family disappearance. The shoe was sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations Laboratory for comprehensive analysis. Detective Rodriguez, who had joined the Holmes County Sheriff's Department 5 years earlier after transferring from Cleveland, was assigned as the lead investigator for the renewed case. Rodriguez brought fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques to the decades-old mystery. Her first step was to conduct a complete review of the original case file, searching for any details that might have been overlooked or inadequately pursued with 1990s technology. The forensic analysis of Emma's shoe revealed several important details. The preservation was indeed remarkable. The leather and fabric components had been protected by the pond's anaerobic environment, particularly during periods when the shoe had been buried in sediment. Testing confirmed that the shoe had been submerged for an extended period, likely decades rather than months or years. Most importantly, DNA analysis detected traces of genetic material consistent with a 5-year-old child, though the sample was too degraded to make a definitive match without comparison samples from known family members. This presented both an opportunity and a challenge for investigators. While the DNA evidence couldn't definitively prove the shoe belonged to Emma Hartwell, it was consistent with that possibility. More significantly, the discovery raised new questions about what had happened to the family and why only one shoe had been found, despite extensive previous searches of the area. Detective Rodriguez organized a systematic re-examination of Miller's Pond using ground-penetrating radar, underwater metal detectors, and a more sophisticated dive team than had been available in 1995. The search expanded to include the entire watershed area, examining places where items might have been carried by water flow over the decades. Teams also investigated the possibility that other evidence might have been scattered by seasonal flooding or deliberate disposal. The renewed investigation attracted the attention of Jennifer's sister, Carol Brennan, now 58 and living in Florida. Carol had never stopped hoping for answers about her sister's family, and she immediately traveled to Ohio to meet with Detective Rodriguez. She provided DNA samples to help with potential comparisons and shared family photographs and personal items that had never been part of the original investigation. Carol's memories of that last birthday party took on new significance in light of the shoe's discovery. She recalled Emma being particularly excited about her new sneakers, which Jennifer had bought specifically for the party. Emma had insisted on wearing them throughout the celebration, even during outdoor activities that might have gotten them dirty. The shoes had been a point of pride for the 5-year-old, who had been allowed to pick them out herself during a rare shopping trip to the mall in Columbus. During her interview with Detective Rodriguez, Carol revealed details about the family's life that hadn't seemed relevant to the original investigation, but might prove significant with fresh analysis. David had been somewhat concerned about financial pressures related to modernizing their farming operation. Jennifer had mentioned that they were considering applying for a loan to purchase additional equipment, but David was hesitant about taking on debt. Neither issue seemed serious enough to motivate a voluntary disappearance, but they provided context for the family's state of mind in the weeks before they vanished. More intriguingly, Carol mentioned that Jennifer had called her the evening before Emma's birthday party, expressing some concern about a man who had been asking questions around town about families with young children. Jennifer hadn't considered it serious enough to contact police, but she had mentioned locking the doors that night, something the family rarely bothered with in their rural setting. This detail had been lost in the original investigation, as Carol hadn't thought to mention it during the emotional chaos following the disappearance. Detective Rodriguez immediately began investigating this lead, searching through archived local newspaper reports and police logs from September and October 1995. She discovered 3 separate reports of a man in his 30s or 40s asking questions about local families, particularly those with young children. The man had been described as driving a dark sedan and claiming to be conducting some type of survey or research project. None of the reports had been connected at the time, and the man had never been identified or located. This potential lead represented the most significant new development in the case since the family's disappearance. Rodriguez worked with a police sketch artist to create composite drawings based on the decade-old witness descriptions, acknowledging that the passage of time made such reconstructions challenging but potentially valuable. The sketches were distributed to law enforcement agencies across the Midwest, with particular attention paid to areas with similar unsolved disappearances from the same time period. The investigation also benefited from advances in database technology and information sharing that hadn't existed in 1995. Rodriguez was able to cross-reference the Hartwell case with similar disappearances nationwide, looking for patterns or connections that might have been missed. She discovered that the mid-1990s had seen several cases of family disappearances in rural areas across the Midwest, though none shared enough specific details to suggest a clear connection to the Hartwell case. As the investigation intensified, the discovery of Emma's shoe continued to raise more questions than it answered. How had only one shoe ended up in Miller's Pond when the family had vanished from their home nearly a mile away? If the family had met with foul play near the pond, why had no other evidence ever been found, despite extensive searches? Had the shoe been deliberately placed in the water, or had it arrived there through some other means? Dr. Hayes, the Ohio State professor whose student had discovered the shoe, offered her expertise in environmental science to help answer some of these questions. Her analysis of water flow patterns, seasonal flooding data, and sediment deposits suggested that the shoe could have traveled a considerable distance before settling in the location where it was found. If the family had encountered trouble anywhere along the Millers Creek watershed, items could potentially have been carried downstream during spring floods or heavy rainfall events. This possibility led Rodriguez to expand the search area significantly, focusing on locations upstream from Miller's Pond, where the family might have been taken or where evidence might have been disposed of. The investigation now covered nearly 50 square miles of rural Holmes County, including abandoned buildings, old mining sites, and dense woodland areas that had been inadequately searched in the original investigation. The renewed media attention brought both benefits and challenges to the investigation. Tips poured in from across the country, many from people who claimed to have information about the case or similar disappearances. While most proved to be false leads or misremembered details, Detective Rodriguez carefully investigated each one, understanding that a single credible tip could break the case open after 26 years. One particularly intriguing lead came from a retired truck driver named William Carson, who contacted the Holmes County Sheriff's Department after seeing news coverage of the shoe's discovery. Carson, now 71, claimed that in October 1995, he had been driving through rural Ohio when he encountered a man attempting to dispose of what appeared to be children's clothing near a bridge over Millers Creek. Carson said he had stopped to offer assistance, thinking the man might have car trouble, but the individual had quickly loaded the items back into his vehicle and driven away without explanation. At the time, Carson hadn't thought much of the encounter, assuming the man had been cleaning out his car or disposing of old clothing. However, the news of the Hartwell case and the discovery of Emma's shoe had triggered his memory of the incident. Carson provided a detailed description of the location and the man he had encountered, information that Rodriguez found consistent with other aspects of the developing investigation. Detective Rodriguez arranged to meet Carson at the location he described, a rural bridge crossing Millers Creek, approximately 3 miles upstream from Miller's Pond. The area, which had been searched only briefly in the original investigation, now took on new significance. If Carson's memory was accurate, and if the incident was connected to the Hartwell disappearance, it could provide crucial information about what had happened to the family and where additional evidence might be found. The bridge location also aligned with Dr. Hayes's analysis of how Emma's shoe might have traveled downstream to Miller's Pond. During periods of high water flow, items disposed of near the bridge could easily have been carried downstream, eventually settling in the pond's calmer waters. This theory gained additional support when Rodriguez examined weather records from October 1995, which showed significant rainfall in the week following the Hartwell family's disappearance. As autumn 2021 progressed, the investigation continued to gain momentum. A specialized search team was organized to conduct a comprehensive examination of the Millers Creek area upstream from the pond, using ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and cadaver dogs. The team included experts from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, FBI behavioral analysts familiar with family abduction cases, and academic researchers with expertise in cold case investigations. The search focused initially on the bridge area described by Carson and gradually expanded both upstream and downstream. The terrain was challenging, heavily wooded in some areas, marshy in others, and dotted with old farm buildings and equipment that provided numerous potential hiding places for evidence. Progress was slow but methodical, with each area being thoroughly documented before moving to the next section. On November 15, 2021, the search team made their second significant discovery. Hidden beneath decades of leaf litter and partially buried under a collapsed section of an old stone fence, investigators found additional children's items: a small purple backpack that appeared to have belonged to a school-aged child, and fragments of what might have been clothing. The backpack, though severely deteriorated, contained remnants of school supplies and a partially readable name tag, suggesting it might have belonged to Rebecca Hartwell. This discovery, made approximately 2 miles upstream from where Emma's shoe had been found, provided the first confirmation that the shoe discovery hadn't been an isolated find. The presence of items belonging to multiple family members suggested that the Hartwells had indeed encountered trouble in the Millers Creek area, possibly while trying to escape from or being taken to an unknown location. Detective Rodriguez felt a mixture of excitement and dread as the evidence began to paint a clearer picture of the family's fate. While the discoveries provided long-awaited answers to some questions, they also suggested that the Hartwell family had likely been victims of violence rather than voluntary disappearance. After 26 years of uncertainty, the community would finally learn the truth about what had happened to David, Jennifer, Michael, Rebecca, and Emma Hartwell. The investigation was far from over, but for the first time since that October day in 1995, Detective Rodriguez felt confident that the mystery of the Hartwell family disappearance would eventually be solved. Emma's small pink shoe, preserved in the depths of Miller's Pond for over 2 decades, had finally begun to tell its story, leading investigators closer to understanding one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases. As winter approached Millbrook, the community watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension as the investigation continued. The truth about the Hartwell family's disappearance, whatever it might be, was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows of time, bringing the possibility of justice and closure to a case that had haunted them for more than a quarter-century. The continuing search of the Millers Creek area revealed additional evidence over the following weeks. A team of forensic anthropologists from Ohio State University joined the investigation, bringing specialized equipment designed to locate human remains in challenging outdoor environments. Their systematic approach, combined with advances in search technology unavailable in 1995, began to yield results that would finally provide answers to the 26-year-old mystery. On December 3, 2021, the search team made the discovery that would transform the Hartwell case from a missing persons investigation into a homicide case. Buried approximately 4 feet underground in a remote wooded area near Millers Creek, investigators uncovered human remains that preliminary examination suggested belonged to multiple individuals. The location, hidden beneath decades of forest growth and accessible only by an old logging road that had been abandoned since the 1980s, explained why previous searches had never found the family. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the State Medical Examiner's office in Columbus for comprehensive analysis. While definitive identification would require extensive forensic work, the number of individuals found and the presence of both adult and child remains strongly suggested that the Hartwell family's fate had finally been discovered. Detective Rodriguez, who had spent months pursuing this case with unwavering determination, felt the complex emotions of an investigator who has finally found answers, even when those answers confirm the worst fears. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief medical examiner, began the painstaking process of identifying the remains and determining cause of death. The condition of the remains, after 26 years in the ground, made the process challenging, but not impossible. Advanced forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, dental records comparison, and isotope testing, would eventually provide definitive identification and crucial information about how the family had died. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Millbrook community and attracted national media attention. For residents who had wondered for more than 2 decades what had happened to their neighbors, the news brought a mixture of relief at finally having answers and profound sadness at the confirmation of their worst fears. The Hartwell family, whose disappearance had become part of local legend, had indeed been victims of violence. Carol Brennan, Jennifer's sister, received the news while at her home in Florida. Despite having prepared herself for this possibility over the years, the confirmation that her sister's family had been murdered was devastating. She immediately made arrangements to travel to Ohio, both to assist with the identification process and to finally lay her family members to rest. The DNA samples she had provided would be crucial in confirming the identity of the remains. As the forensic analysis continued, Detective Rodriguez focused on the criminal investigation aspect of the case. The discovery of the remains provided crucial evidence about the location and method of disposal, but the identity of the perpetrator remained unknown. The investigation now shifted toward examining who might have had the knowledge, opportunity, and motive to commit such a crime against the Hartwell family. The remote location where the bodies were found required significant local knowledge to access and use effectively. The old logging road had been unused for years, and the burial site was situated in an area that would have been nearly impossible to find without familiarity with the terrain. This suggested that the perpetrator was likely someone familiar with the local area, possibly a long-time resident of Holmes County or someone with extensive knowledge of the rural landscape. Detective Rodriguez began developing a profile of potential suspects based on the evidence discovered and the method of disposal. The killer would have needed access to transportation capable of reaching the remote burial site, physical capability to dig graves and move multiple bodies, and detailed knowledge of an area where the remains could be hidden for decades. The crime also suggested a level of planning and preparation that pointed toward someone with experience or careful premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of violence. The investigation team reviewed the original case files with fresh perspective, looking for individuals who had been interviewed in 1995 but might not have been thoroughly investigated due to the lack of evidence at the time. They also examined property records to identify who had owned or had access to the land where the bodies were found, though the remote location had been owned by various entities over the decades and had been accessible to anyone with knowledge of the old logging roads. One name that emerged during this review was that of Harold Jameson, a man who had lived in the area in 1995 and had been briefly questioned during the original investigation. Jameson, who would now be in his 70s if still alive, had worked as a handyman and had been known for his extensive knowledge of local back roads and remote areas. During the original investigation, he had been questioned because he had occasionally done work for families in the area, but no evidence had connected him to the Hartwell disappearance. Detective Rodriguez began searching for Jameson, discovering that he had left the Millbrook area in 1997 approximately 2 years after the Hartwell family disappeared. His departure from the community shortly after the disappearance, combined with his knowledge of remote local areas, made him a person of interest worth pursuing. However, finding someone who had left the area more than 20 years ago presented its own challenges. The search for Jameson led investigators through a complex trail of addresses and employment records across multiple states. They discovered that he had worked construction jobs in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky over the years, never staying in one place for very long. This pattern of frequent relocation was consistent with someone who might be avoiding scrutiny or uncomfortable with law enforcement attention. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the remains continued to yield important information. Dr. Mitchell's examination revealed evidence of trauma that confirmed the family had been victims of violence. While the specific details were not released to the public pending the ongoing investigation, the findings provided Detective Rodriguez with crucial information about how the family had died and additional evidence that might help identify their killer. The breakthrough in identifying a suspect came from an unexpected source. A retired Pennsylvania State Police detective named Robert Chen had been following news coverage of the Hartwell case and recognized Harold Jameson's name from a case he had worked in 2003. Jameson had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a family in rural Pennsylvania, though he had never been charged due to insufficient evidence. Chen contacted Detective Rodriguez to share his information and case files. The Pennsylvania case had involved the Turner family, a couple and their 2 young children who had disappeared from their rural home under circumstances eerily similar to the Hartwell case. The family had vanished without a trace, leaving behind personal belongings and vehicles with no evidence of voluntary departure. Jameson had been working construction in the area at the time and had been questioned because he had recently completed work on the family's property. However, without physical evidence or witnesses, the case had gone cold. This information transformed the investigation from a single murder case into a potential serial killer investigation. Detective Rodriguez contacted law enforcement agencies in areas where Jameson had lived and worked, asking them to review unsolved disappearances or murders from those time periods. The results were disturbing. Jameson's presence in various communities appeared to coincide with several unsolved cases involving family disappearances or murders. The multi-jurisdictional investigation that followed involved law enforcement agencies from 6 states and revealed a pattern of violence that had gone undetected for decades. Jameson appeared to target rural families with young children, using his work as a handyman to gain access to homes and assess potential victims. His method of completely disposing of bodies in remote locations had prevented investigators from connecting the various cases until now. The current challenge was locating Jameson, who would now be 74 years old if still alive. The trail of employment records and addresses ended abruptly in 2019, with his last known location being a small town in eastern Kentucky. Rodriguez coordinated with Kentucky State Police to investigate whether Jameson was still in the area and whether any recent unsolved cases might be connected to his presence. On January 18, 2022, Kentucky State Police located Jameson living alone in a deteriorating trailer on a remote property outside Hazard, Kentucky. When officers arrived to question him about the Hartwell case, they found him in poor health and initially uncooperative. However, when confronted with evidence from the Ohio investigation and information about similar cases from other states, Jameson eventually agreed to speak with investigators. The confession that followed provided closure to multiple families who had waited decades for answers about their missing loved ones. Jameson admitted to killing the Hartwell family, describing how he had observed their isolated farmhouse while doing work in the area and planned the attack for weeks. On the night after Emma's birthday party, he had entered their home and forced the family at gunpoint to accompany him to the remote location where their bodies were eventually found. Jameson's confession revealed the cold calculation behind his crimes. He had specifically targeted families with young children in rural areas, believing such cases would receive less attention from law enforcement than urban crimes. His method of complete disposal of bodies had indeed prevented detection for decades, and only the chance discovery of Emma's shoe in Miller's Pond had finally led to the breakthrough that exposed his crimes. The legal proceedings that followed were complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and decades-old evidence. Jameson was charged with 5 counts of aggravated murder in Ohio, with additional charges pending in other states where he had confessed to similar crimes. Despite his age and poor health, prosecutors were determined to see justice served for the families he had destroyed over his long criminal career. For the community of Millbrook, Jameson's arrest and confession brought a mixture of relief and profound sadness. After 26 years of wondering what had happened to the Hartwell family, they finally had answers, even though those answers confirmed their worst fears. The family had indeed been victims of a calculating predator who had specifically targeted them for their vulnerability and isolation. Carol Brennan was able to finally lay her sister's family to rest in a ceremony that brought together the entire Millbrook community. The funeral service, held at the same church where Jennifer had been an active member, served as both a memorial to the Hartwell family and a moment of closure for a community that had been haunted by their disappearance for more than 2 decades. The case also led to important changes in how law enforcement agencies share information about unsolved cases and missing persons. The failure to connect Jameson's crimes across multiple jurisdictions highlighted the need for better coordination and communication between agencies, particularly when dealing with transient suspects who commit crimes in different states. Detective Rodriguez received recognition for her persistent work in solving the case, but she emphasized that the breakthrough had only been possible because of advances in forensic science and the chance discovery of Emma's shoe. Without that initial piece of physical evidence, Jameson might have continued to evade justice, and the families of his victims might never have learned the truth about their loved ones' fates. The story of the Hartwell family disappearance and its eventual solution became a symbol of both the persistence of evil and the persistence of justice. Harold Jameson's decades-long crime spree had finally been stopped, and the families he had destroyed could finally find some measure of peace in knowing the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Emma's small pink shoe, which had rested in the depths of Miller's Pond for 26 years, had finally fulfilled its purpose as evidence. The 5-year-old's footwear had become the key that unlocked one of Ohio's most enduring mysteries, bringing justice to a family that had been silenced by violence but never forgotten by their community. In solving the Hartwell case, investigators had also closed multiple other cases across the Midwest, providing answers to families who had waited decades for the truth about their missing loved ones.